Welcome to the Smarter Sales Show, your weekly tech tips and technique tune-up with a special focus on virtual selling. The Smarter Sales Show is for sales professionals and sales leaders who need lots of sales with very little effort. So join us here because we teach you the tech and technique to sell more and stress less. I'm Merritt Khan. I'm the one who knows what to say in any sales situation. I'm joined by my co-host, Julie Holmes, the one who knows exactly the right sales tech to use for any sales situation. And today we're excited because we're kicking off a series of 4 episodes on building relationships and rapport in a virtual world. Now, if you're a super fan of the show, you've already clicked on the link for the bonus content in the show notes if you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, or in the attachment sections if you're watching us on video on the Sales Experts channel. We've got a lot to cover, so are you ready? Let's get
ready.
Smarter in sales.
Okay. I was just being silly. Here's the truth of it. The truth of it is that Merritt and I got super excited. Excited. We got enthusiastic. We had a heated discussion. We had a conversation, an emotionally invested conversation. Indeed. And that emotionally invested conversation led us to this 4-pack. And that conversation was really about whether or not it's harder or easier to build relationships in a virtual selling service and when we're selling virtually. Now, it may seem like, oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding. Of course, it's easier to build relationships when you're in person. But what was interesting is that we chatted and came up with 5 very distinct and I think very unusual differences to how we sell virtually compared to how we sell in person, and some of the areas in which those differences manifest themselves. So Merritt and I thought we would bring those to you in this episode because the truth is there are pros and cons of selling virtually versus selling in person. Yes. And if you know what your kind of the areas are, you can really make a massive difference and deliver on those.
Absolutely. And I think the most important thing in this conversation is to just keep an open mind, right? There's, virtual selling isn't going away. We've talked about that in previous episodes, and you've come to grips with that. But, what can you listen for out of this conversation that gives you a new opening for a new possibility that supports you in your sales goals? So with that, take it away. What is the first distinction, Julie?
Okay, so we came up with 5 areas, and these 5 areas are time, context, expectation, connection, and differentiation. And some of these we've talked about before, and some of these we're going to talk about more over the course of this year because we're focusing our whole year of episodes on virtual sales. So the first one, as I mentioned, is time. Now, time was a really interesting conversation because what I have found most fascinating is that there's a huge variety of people in sales. There are Merritts and there are Julies. Now,
that about covers
let me explain what I mean by that, right? So Merritt is an amazing relationship salesperson. Like, I'm telling you what, I remember that I went to Merritt's one-woman show and I was like, oh my gosh, she has so many friends. How do you know so many people? I'm the person that if I had a dinner party, I would be super concerned about who I would invite and what we would talk about when they got there. So I'm going to give Merritt the extrovert badge, and I am definitely owning that introvert badge. I have a small circle of close friends, but what I don't do is I don't schmooze very well. I can turn it on for a trade show, but it's a lot of work and it thoroughly exhausts me at the end.
It's interesting because I think, you are definitely good in person. You definitely don't have any trouble at all building relationships with people in a live in-person environment, but you're also so much more comfortable with the technology than I am. So I wonder if sometimes, am I good in person because that's all I have to go on because I'm not in my happy spot sitting behind this camera with the lights and the microphone and making sure everything is going whereas you probably sit down, you're like, okay, no problem. I'm I'm still in that curve of like getting really comfortable in this domain. I'd much rather get on a plane and meet somebody and break bread with them. But I think that's just probably my comfort zone, right? Like I didn't have years of virtual selling in my background, so I didn't have to get good at that. And now I think people are recognizing like, yeah, we have to be good at both.
Yeah. And I think that's fair. Actually, what's interesting, Merritt, is that your background is actually in person-to-person selling.
Yeah.
Right. So you've done a lot of face-to-face selling. My 20 plus years in enterprise tech meant that I was rarely face-to-face. Like, I mean, before we had, Zoom and before we had, WebEx and GoToMeeting and all of those, absolutely it was face-to-face. Right. But for the most part, even then we were doing conference calls. Yeah. We weren't doing virtual meetings. And in fact, it's interesting when I'll mention that when we talk about context. But so when it comes to time, there's this, I think the biggest question is, do I have more time now that I'm doing virtual selling, or do I have less time? And there's pros and cons from a time perspective, both in live, if we say, live selling versus virtual selling. In that live selling scenario, you've got more time with your prospect, right? You'll have at least an hour. If you're flying out to see someone or even driving over to their offices, not only will you be like, you know what? Yeah, we're going to meet for an hour and then I'm going to take you out to lunch, right? So I've got this time, and in that time I can build rapport. So this whole 4-pack is about relationship building. And the challenge, of course, from a time perspective is that, yes, when you're in person, you get more time. But here's the downside to that in-person selling is that it takes more time to do that.
Yeah.
Because you're spending time in the car and time on a plane and time preparing and time getting ready, and you have to tie your shoes. And let's be honest, many of us haven't worn shoes that tie for quite some time, right?
I may or may not be wearing shoes that tie right now.
Or even pants with buckles, right? Like, I mean, it's time to break out those yoga pants that actually look like work pants. So, that's what's interesting. And then on the flip side of that, in virtual selling, you can get many more sales calls in because you have a shorter time window.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the biggest surprises that I've found and that I've talked to my clients about is that they can really go back to back to back with meetings. You could have, six or seven sales calls in a day. And because you don't have that drive time, that windshield time, I used to call it, which makes a huge difference. The other thing I notice is that, and I'm constantly talking to people about this, is take that time that you would have spent in driving there and commuting to really put it into building the connections with people in more creative ways. Take that time to investigate a little bit more about their company or the industry, the pain points that people are frustrated about in their world right now. Put yourself in their shoes and really use that time to prepare. So I think, the upside is being able to stack more sales conversations into a day, but also the downside of that is that we're not always building in those buffer zones between meetings to think about what did we learn? What did, how did that conversation go? What did we promise? How do we deliver that? And so I think it's just a reallocation of time, but I do think overall we have a lot more time that if we invest it wisely can be really sales focused as opposed to just getting from point A to point B.
I think that's a great way. So maybe that's the first challenge. The first challenge from this episode that I would put forward is, how are you reallocating your time? Because I know that at least in the beginning, and I'm still struggling with this, I didn't reallocate my time. All I did was just bury myself in meetings.
Yeah.
And I just was never coming up for air. And, there's a lot when we start talking about virtual meetings and the toll they take on us physically and emotionally and mentally, right? There's a toll that being on camera all day long takes on you. There's been some fascinating studies about this and about how it impacts your, your disposition and how it impacts your sleep and all these other factors. And when we just bury ourselves one meeting after another, there's implications. Now, the other thing I'll add about time before we go on to number 2 is that when we think about time, the pace of those conversations that you're having from a sales perspective is massively different. So the pace of that conversation is different. Now it suits me to the ground. Like there's nothing that makes me happier than getting on a conference call. I had an entire sales call, the entire thing from scoping to qualifying to price to confirmation. I had an entire sales call today in 20 minutes.
Wow.
We even got 10 minutes back at the end. But all because like the rapport building, like that kind of chit chatty bit that happens at the beginning, we condense that to about a minute, and we'll talk about some strategies for that, right? Not that that should be always what you do, but it was with somebody I had met before. So we didn't have to do like a whole big kind of review situation, but the benefit of that meant that there is an expectation time-wise that you're going to get in there, make it happen, have your call, check the boxes, and then get off that call.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a different environment, which actually is a really nice lead into number 2 on our list, which is context. Because, if you think about it, context is about the environment, the I don't know, you can't use the word in the same definition, but the context of that communication, that experience. So, when you think about it, you're learning things about people from the background, right? When it used to be, back when I was doing sales training, 20 years ago, we would teach people like, look around the office, see something, pick out something on the desk. Like that was revolutionary.
It was in that
20 years ago, remember? And then everybody did it. And now it's like, oh, seriously? Okay. So you're going to talk about the fish on the wall, the picture of my golf, buddies on my desk. And then we're going to get down to business. Like, that's kind of old school now, but the same principle applies. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a connection with people. And we're doing that by taking a look around, and we don't have as much control over that these days because the context is, I can only get to know you based on what I see in this little tiny square. You have no idea what the technology is that they're consuming that on. Like, are they looking at you on their tiny little phone? Are they looking at you on a giant desktop? I mean, we have no idea. But also, I think we can be more in control of what we want somebody to observe about us. So for example, if you look on my background, if you're watching us on the Sales Experts channel, you have the benefit of video, and you can see behind me is a pillow that says, "Are you open to?" And that's a very deliberate choice in my background, because I want somebody to pick up on that and say, well, that's interesting. What does that mean? And then it leads me very deliberately into a conversation about making sure that people are open to new ideas and possibilities, and they haven't already decided that things are as good as they're going to get. They're open to something new and improved, a new idea, a new way to solve a problem. And that's obviously what I do with my offers and how I work with people. Julie, in her background, has a pillow very similar in style, and it says, there's an app for that. Why? That's a deliberate choice. She wants you to know she has an app for that. Like, whatever problem you bring Julie, there is an app for it. She can solve that. And so it's a deliberate decision, even within how we dress our little squares on the screen, so that people can build relationships with us. And we're picking things out. I mean, we can't be, are they fidgeting? Are they tapping their knee? There's so much that we're not able to pick up on because we're not in person. But I think those same relationship principles still apply. So age-old rapport building skills that you would have applied in an in-person world still apply in a virtual world. You just have to take a little closer look.
Well, and here's the other thing I'll add about that. Technology and all of these video meetings that we're doing now have actually given you a whole new set of context. In some cases, a richer context than what you might have gotten when you were doing face-to-face selling. For example, you're in my house. right? I mean, we used to see a sterile office, maybe a conference room. I mean, we go far enough back. Sure, you used to go to somebody's office, but most of the time we're doing committee-based selling. And so we're not actually, even in face-to-face sales, we're not getting to see anybody's personal collections of anything. We don't get to see their Beanie Babies stacked up on the windowsill. Instead,
I'm not sure I want to see that.
You didn't sell to the tech department. I can tell you that right now. But you are seeing into their homes, right? And you're also seeing them in what is possibly in a very unguarded state. Right? Because we're sitting in our homes, because we're wearing yoga pants and because we're wearing slippers, and we're really only, dressing from the waist up these days, and we're sitting in our home offices, right? You can hear the kids screaming. You can hear, people like me apologizing for having a puppy in the background, like whatever it is, you're getting an entirely new set of context.
That's true.
And don't neglect the value of that additional context. You are in their homes. That is a lot of context.
Yeah. And I think that makes for a more relaxed prospect, a more relaxed conversation. The first part of a good sales process is to bring the defense wall down so that people can have an honest, straightforward conversation about the issues that are really challenging them and causing them frustration and concern and worry. And if somebody's defense wall is high because of any reason, then we're not able to solve the real problem to begin with. So you can't really move forward in your sales process if with a prospect who's very guarded. So I think, to your point, Julie, in many ways, people are more relaxed, and especially some of the introverts that might not have reacted well, right? In a typical sales scenario, you've got the outgoing, positive, optimistic, loud salesperson, and you've got the prospect who may be a little bit more reserved. And so, we're taught mirroring and matching. And so we kind of dial back to make them feel more comfortable and all of that. But in a virtual setting, we're all just kind of in our little squares over here where we're kind of safe and protected. So maybe in some ways, the introverts that we are selling to feel a little bit more comfortable because this pushy, big personality is a little bit dialed back in this format. So,
yeah, I think that's true. And you know what? I think that whole kind of dialing it up and dialing it back is a great segue into number 3. Number 3 is one of the ones I'm most excited about, or at least that I find most interesting, and that is around expectations. And I think that what's interesting about expectation is not just the impact that it's having right now, but the impact it's going to keep having as time moves forward. So what's happened is we've gone from our traditional experience, what we were all experiencing, over a year ago, in the kind of the sales cycle of this is how a sales cycle runs. This is how we build relationships when we're in a sales cycle. This is how we interact as vendors and buyers and as sales professionals and clients. We have our roles and everybody knew how to play their part. And that expectation has really changed.
Yeah.
It's, forget about the, I'm going to take you for golf and then we're going to wine and dine you. Like, you're going to get some of that back, but you're not going to get all of it back. And there's a couple of reasons why that's true. First, the number of organizations that are not going back to in the office is staggering, right? So many of us have moved to work from home, even if we worked at corporations or organizations that had premises. A lot of those organizations are going, you know what, we've actually gotten pretty good productivity. And we don't want to pay all that real estate cost to have people, in an office. And so they're at home. So now when you talk about wining and dining them or the committee sale and taking everyone out to lunch, they're not going to be there. They're not going to physically be in the same location. And you're also going to start to see that remote work stretching geographically even more. You're going to start to have organizations that say, well, if people are working remotely, it isn't going to matter where they're located. So they can be anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you think about the sales presentations, when you would, travel somewhere, make a presentation to a group in their office, you can pretty much count on somebody in that who's going to be in that presentation is going to be piped in on a screen somewhere. So now even that expectation of, how I'm presenting my offers is different. Like the environment is completely different. Yeah.
Yeah, I think environment, I mean, you're going to see all of this coming out, all the different things that we're talking about in this list of 5 items. I mean, this is the one where they're all going to present. Yeah. Because we have less time or our time is being utilized differently, the expectations are going to become different. Because we have more or less context, the expectation of how you interact with me is going to be different. And we get to differentiation and connection. Those are all the same. So just know that when you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I just don't even know if I'm playing the right game, or I need to hurry up and get back to the way things used to be. Here's what we would encourage you. Expectations for sales meetings have changed. Are you ready? Like, are you prepared for what that really means? And are you shifting your sales processes and your approach to match those new expectations? Or are you just flying by the seat of your pants, hoping that things go back to the good old days and the way they used to be? So watch out for the expectations.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm a big fan of learning in a way that matches your sales process. So this is actually a good segue for today's sponsor. In today's day and age, we're doing more selling online, and it makes actually a lot of sense to do your learning and practicing online too. So I've studied sales systems for more than 2 decades, and I really want to give a shout out to my friends at Select Sales Development. They were way ahead of the curve on this virtual sales training. They've been actually offering it way before the pandemic hit, and they really figured out how to do it well. Now, most online sales courses are sort of that do-it-yourself variety, but in sales, you really have to customize your process so that what the team at Select Sales Development has done is they offer these live, real-time interactive coaching sessions along with their on-demand training content. So it's not like, here's your sales process, you go learn it on your own. No. You're going to work with a real coach. You're going to brainstorm and all of that. And as a bonus, I do happen to be one of their coaches. So I can say with confidence, you will be in good hands. But to learn more, you want to go to selectsales.com, but we spell it weird. It's SELLECT, not because we can't spell the word select, because it's all about the sell. So what a great segue to the next difference in relationship building virtually, because when people are part of a Select Sales group coaching community, they're part of something special together. They're working together as a team. And our 4th difference in this, how to sell differently and master virtual relationships, is really about connection. And one of the things that's fascinating is that more than ever, we have this global shared experience in this pandemic that really forced all of us to, at the same time, change everything about how we work and relate to other human beings. For many years, I've actually worked with companies to put processes in place to help them onboard new employees, get them integrated into the culture, feeling part of the team, up and running as quickly as possible with very little management oversight. That was always the goal of an onboarding program. And one of the things that was unique about how I would design those programs for clients is that I would be very deliberate in building experiences, both work experiences and social experiences, that connected people immediately to the values of the company. And so some people are wired that how they feel a connection with another person is because there's been a shared work experience. We're all working toward a common goal for this team, a common result. So I know my place on the team, and as we're working together to reach this goal, we're creating this foundation of a bond. Other people are more social, right? And so that's why actually that going for a beer after work with your colleagues, that's a bonding event, especially for a new hire, when you can be in person. So, we have to kind of figure out different ways to connect with people. But when we work together on a common goal or through shared experiences, we have these natural bonds which serve to deepen relationships.
And provide brilliant stories that you get to reference back for years.
Exactly. So I think that what's available to us now in this virtual sales environment is that we have to maybe think a little bit more creatively about how to create those shared connections, but we're all starting from a foundation of, well, we are all in this together. We've been hearing that since March of 2020. And that is true, more so than any other event that's happened. Some events are US based and some events are world based, but this really, all levels, all types of people, no matter what you believe, no matter where you live, no matter how you work, this has impacted you. And so it's this shared experience. So now on top of that, we can build better, more lasting connections because we're starting with something bigger than like, so what's the weather where you're at? You know, it's like,
although really that still is one of my favorite questions.
Yeah, but that's
because we're all looking longingly outside. I want to go out. I want to go out.
Yeah,
I think that's is a really good point. We have a shared foundation, which has given some of us more in common than we would maybe have ever found.
Yeah.
I also think that it's made us all value relationships a bit more. Right. You know, this idea that we've all largely been very isolated, even if we have our bubbles and our kind of our support systems. You know, I think even people like me who are naturally quite happy, you know, on our own, even I'm like, I would like to see anybody other than my family, anybody. Like even the mailman gets like a massive smile and a wave for me every day. So I think, you know, that whole connection and that shared experience is something that you can leverage from a sales perspective, right? Recognizing that that's the case. And maybe part of that connection, and I know we've talked about this on previous episodes, part of that connection is recognizing that people are experiencing some level of trauma from this, right? So, you know, make sure that when you're talking about like, oh, it's another day in lockdown. Oh, you know, nobody's going on vacation this time. You know, especially depending on where you are in the world, we're all having similar yet different experiences. Like I'm watching I'm in the UK right now. We are on lockdown. Like we still are not out. Like I can't go on a vacation right now, you know, and so, you know, there's this part where you want to be very conscious that your experience, while similar, is different than what somebody else might be experiencing.
Yeah. And while that would be a perfect segue into differentiation, I want to make one more point. Which just left me as soon as I got to it. Darn when that happens when you're recording live.
You didn't make the connection. Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, it'll come back to me at some point.
All right, well, we'll save that. So you get an add-on. You get a freebie add-on.
All right.
In the next one. Okay, so let's go to number 5, and then if Merritt remembers what she wanted to add to number 4, we can come back to it.
I got it. I thought.
All right, let's stop right there and add number 4. Go, Merritt.
Okay. Go. So I think, you know, I'm always like loading some sound bites on you, and I think that's a great place to put a soundbite, right? So if we're all in the shared connection experience and dealing with it at different levels, the thing that takes us back to a sales conversation is really important. So you want to get this language right. And I know I've talked about the balance between empathy and assertiveness. It's so important. And I'll mention some other emotional intelligence things coming up in a couple of weeks when I do a little bit of a deeper dive on virtual relationships in terms of what to say and the technique side of things. But one of the things you can say really easily is, hey, look, you know, we're still dealing with all of the trauma, uncertainty, you know, the change in this world. And there's so much that still feels a little out of our control. Can we just focus? Are you open for a moment to just focus on some of the things that we can control? And let's talk about the issues that are frustrating you as it relates to your blah, blah, blah. And let's see if there's something we can do to just deal with that one little thing, that one little part of life that I can help you with. And I think that gets you, you know, it kind of takes this broad conversation of like, all this drama, and then it focuses somebody in mind and words on what they can actually do and how you can help. And so I think that little soundbite might help you.
Yeah. All right. And I'll just add one more. Here's just a little tiny tip. You know what? It's a weird thing, but I have found recently that when I jump on calls, particularly with prospects, it's been a really good exercise to say, look, I know we're just starting this call and I know we have a lot to talk about and I'm excited to do that. But I also know that if you're anything like me, you might be back to back in meetings. I just want to offer, do you need 5 minutes? do you need a bio break really quick before we dive in?
Oh,
You
I
know,
love
like, do
that.
you need to go grab a water? Do you need to go to the toilet because you haven't been in 7 hours? Like, you know, do you need a second? You know, and the thing is they might be like, no, I'm good. But you know what they're going to think? There are definitely times where that offer would have been really helpful.
Yeah, that's
So,
great.
you know,
This is being
again,
human.
that connection, right? You know, remember, they are like you. And if you've been in that position, so have they.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, differentiation.
Okay, all right. Last but far from least is differentiation. And here's what I've been most fascinated about when it comes to differentiation. I have heard more than one sales professional say, you know, this is a level playing field. Like, it doesn't matter anymore. You know, we're all using Zoom or WebEx or GoToMeeting. You know, we're all using these platforms. So you know what? There's not any way to stand out anymore because it's just all the same. And I'm like, no, you are so wrong. And you are going to lose sales because of it. Because here's the deal when it comes to differentiation. You're right. We are all, in many cases, using the same technology and the same platform. However, that's where the difference ends. Because the way you engage with that platform is your differentiator. The way that you leverage your time before and after a sales call, that's now your differentiator. The experience that you deliver as a sales professional virtually is your differentiator. Yeah. And if you aren't looking at that as an opportunity to differentiate, you're missing the boat. You're right. You are going to look like every other schlep that's out there.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, I think one of the things that I've learned from you over the series of episodes that we've done, season 1 and now season 2, is really how to use technology to add into the ways that I know I'm good at connecting with people in person, right? All the charm and the humor and the stuff that I've studied about interpersonal relationships and how to make people feel at ease, and all of those things are still as vital today, if not more so. But I think the ways of, connecting with people, video emails you've talked about, numerous times, or sending something to someone in advance of a meeting. I'll tell you what, the other thing is, when it's appropriate, based on you, your prospects or clients, and what's going on in your immediate environment, the fact that you would go and meet somebody in person now has like extra credit points all over it. So last week I got on a plane and I went to go visit my biggest client from last year. They hired me. We were supposed to do a whole series of in-person training events. And then, the pandemic hit and we pivoted, because everyone did that. But we went to all this whole, virtual way that we were working. And so all that time working with all the top leaders in their whole organization, I never met them in person. So they're in a really beautiful spot that gets a lot of sunshine, and we had a little bit of snow in Colorado. So I was like, you know what, I need a little sun. Who can I go see? And so I thought, well, I'll go visit my client. And it was really neat. And the appreciation, the just the acknowledgement of like, I can't believe you came here. Like, that meant something more than it would have a year and a half ago. So, point. There's still things that we can do to stand out. I think it's actually easier to stand out in this virtual, in-person, hybrid world, because so many people either are not excited to get back in person, or they're so rusty at it, or, they just haven't done a good job of combining the best of both worlds.
Or they're dialing it in.
Yeah.
Right. After being on so many Zoom calls, they're just, like literally and figuratively, they're just dialing it in.
Yeah.
But here's another thing I will remind everyone, and it depends on how long you've been playing, if you've been in the sales, professional space. You know what? There's a whole year's worth of new sales professionals that don't know any different.
That's such a good point. Wow.
First of all, that makes me feel old. But after I'm done feeling old, it will remind me. It's been really interesting. I've been working with some young sales teams recently, and you know what? They this is just how it is.
Just the water they swim in.
And so they don't, they're not feeling the same kind of angst that some of us who have been around this block and several other blocks, and in fact, have probably done a marathon in the city center, like the rest of us have not necessarily, we're not as comfortable with that, but they are. So when it comes to differentiation, this is no time to sit on your keyboard and just hope for the best, right? You need to be out there and making some magic happen and really be thinking strategically about how you sell virtually and the experience that you deliver virtually, because that is what's going to differentiate you. I mean, it might feel like we're all doing the same thing in virtual selling, but that makes it even easier to differentiate yourself.
Yeah. So I think, there's so much that we talked about in this episode, the ways to differentiate in virtual selling, but when you really look at those 5 elements, right? Time, context, expectation, connection, and differentiation, there's so much in each of those 5 buckets. And I'm sure there's probably other buckets that we didn't have a chance to really dive into today, but there's, I think when you really look at it, like, I think about one of the things that you mentioned earlier was leveraging time. Like, really look at how the time that you've saved from running around all over the place, and how do you invest that into something that's really deliberately focused on forwarding the sales process and building that relationship and connection and differentiating yourself. I think that there's so much creativity that's available to us using technology and the strengths that you already have from in-person selling and building relationships and rapport. And just maybe if we just lean into those things, I don't think building relationships virtually has to be so drastically different. I think the things that made us good at relationship building in the past are going to continue to bring us, results in the future. It's just the delivery models, right? Like, get over it.
Yeah. I think the big thing that I always thought, of the 5 items, the one that I think the most resonates is, for me, differentiation. Right? It's just so important to think strategically and intentionally about everything that you're doing in your sales process, asking yourself, why am I doing this? Is it going to further my relationship, or is it going to further the sales process? Is it going to do both? Or am I just filling time?
Yeah.
Like, are you filling a purpose, or are you just filling time? And to that light, I'll give you the tease for next week. So when it comes to differentiation, one way that you can truly differentiate is by being really good at this whole virtual meeting thing, right? Where we're constantly meeting right now. It's not going to go away. And if you aren't an expert in how to use Zoom, especially, now's your big chance. So I'm going to focus next week's episode. I'm going to focus entirely on how to be better on virtual meetings, how to truly rock a virtual meeting as a sales professional. And we're going to focus that whole episode on it. So if you're looking for ways to differentiate, there's your easy one. So my challenge for you is, yes, we've got these 5 ways that virtual selling is different than in-person selling, but what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
What are you going to do with the information that we've shared with you today? Like, what is one action that you can take that will positively impact the way that you are taking advantage of the time, the context, the expectation, the connection, or the differentiation? And if that's not specific enough for you, then just show up next week.
Yeah, because really all of that, it's about, sales is still a relationship business. It's never not going to be about relationships. Unless you sell widgets for 2 cents less than the next widget and everything is just a transaction. That's not who listens to this podcast. We're not about transactions. We're about, consultative sales process where you are an integral part of the dynamic. And that's where, it's important to learn all these things. It's about being different in order to establish deeper relationships that lead to sales. And so if you want to stand out from the crowd as a smart sales pro, and maybe even get a shout out on the air from us, How about that? We'd really love to hear your story. We'd love to hear your story about what you've learned from previous episodes, how it's made a difference for you. drop us a review. That 5-star review, it helps spread the word about the show so that we can let other sales professionals know, not your competitors, by the way. Your competitors will never listen, just the people that you want. But subscribe to the podcast, register to attend next week's show on the Sales Experts channel, and we'd love to hear from you.
Don't forget, you can always find us at thesmartersalesshow.com. You can find links to your favorite platforms with all of the podcasts. So, whether you want to watch us on YouTube or whether you want to listen on your, commute on your Peloton, whatever it is, you can listen to us there. We've certainly gotten some questions from our fans and listeners about how they can work with us, and whether that's because they need a tech tune-up for the team, or they just need some technique training and they want to brush up, whether that's for their in-person or their virtual selling. Then that's often where they want to contact us. And sometimes it's because they want to bring us in for that highly coveted and much anticipated in-person event. I know I am desperate to go to some in-person events. So if you are interested in adding some energy, some fun, and some incredibly valuable content to your event, whether it's a sales kickoff or even just a quarterly meeting, then you can contact us. You can shoot us an email at hello@thesmartersalesshow.com.
I'm Merritt Khan. You want to remember that we are all in this together. I want to give a special shout out and thank you to the folks at Select Sales Development for being our show sponsor. So go check them out online, selectsales.com.
And I'm Julie Holmes, and it is always a joy to share with you some cool tech and techniques. Don't forget to check out our resources page for this 4-pack. It's now up and live. You'll find a link for that here in the Sales Experts channel. You'll find that in the link section, wherever that's called.
Attachments.
Attachments. And if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you are listening to this in the podcast, then check out either the description or the show notes. Remember, tons of free resources every week. We are here to help you.
And you've been listening to the Smarter Sales Show. We'll see you next time.